You told it in your sleep. I said to myself, how splendid that is. This is a habit which must be cultivated. My brother rattled innocently on. When you were talking in your sleep, you kept mumbling something about matches, which I couldn't make anything out of. But just now, when you began to tell me about the man and the calaboose and the matches, I remembered that in your sleep you mentioned Ben Kuntz 2 or 3 times. So I put this and that together, you see, and right away I knew it was Ben that burnt that man up. I praised his sagacity effusively. Presently he asked, "Are you going to give him up to the law?" "No," I said. "I believe that this will be a lesson to him. I shall keep an eye on him, of course, for that is but right. But if he stops where he is and reforms, it shall never be said that I betrayed him." "How good you are." "Well, I try to be. It is all a person can do in a world like this." And now, my burden being shifted to other shoulders, my terrors soon faded away. The day before we left Hannibal, a curious thing fell under my notice, the surprising spread which longitudinal time undergoes there. I learned it from one of the most unostentatious of men, the colored coachman of a friend of mine who lives 3 miles from town. He was to call for me at the Park Hotel at 7:30 p.m. and drive me out, but he missed it considerably, did not arrive till 10. He excused himself by saying, "De time is mo's an hour and a half slower in de country and what it is in de town. You'll be in plenty time, boss. Sometimes we shoves out early for church Sunday, en fetches up dar right plumb in de middle de sermon. Diffunce in de time. A body can't make no calculations bout it." I had lost 2 hours and a half, but I had learned a fact worth 4. Chapter 57. An Archangel. From St. Louis northward, there are all the enlivening signs of the presence of active, energetic, intelligent, prosperous, practical 19th century populations. The people don't dream, they work. The happy result is manifest all around in the substantial outside aspect of things, and the suggestions of wholesome life and comfort that everywhere appear. Quincy is a notable example, a brisk, handsome, well-ordered city, and now, as formerly, interested in art, letters, and other high things. But Marion City is an exception. Marion City has gone backwards in a most unaccountable way. This metropolis promised so well that the projectors tacked city to its name in the very beginning with full confidence, but it was bad prophecy. When I first saw Marion City, 35 years ago, it contained 1 street and nearly or quite 6 houses. It contains but 1 house now, and this one in a state of ruin is getting ready to follow the former 5 into the river. Doubtless Marion City was too near to Quincy. It had another disadvantage. It was situated in a flat mud bottom below high water mark, whereas Quincy stands high up on the slope of a hill. In the beginning, Quincy had the aspect and ways of a model New England town, and these she has yet. Broad, clean streets, trim, neat dwellings and lawns, fine mansions, stately blocks of commercial buildings, and there are ample fair grounds, a well-kept park and many attractive drives, library, reading rooms, a couple of colleges, some handsome and costly churches, and a grand courthouse with grounds which occupy a square. The population of the city is 30,000. There are some large factories here, and manufacturing of many sorts is done on a great scale. La Grange and Canton are growing towns, but I missed Alexandria, was told it was under water but would come up to blow in the summer. Keokuk was easily recognizable. I lived there in 1857, an extraordinary year there in real estate matters. The boom was something wonderful. Everybody bought, everybody sold, except widows and preachers, they always hold on, and when the tide ebbs they get left. Anything in the semblance of a town lot, no matter how situated, was saleable, and at a figure which would still have been high if the ground had been sodded with greenbacks. The town has a population of 15,000 now, and is progressing with a healthy growth. It was night, and we could not see details, for which we were sorry, for Keokuk has the reputation of being a beautiful city. It was a pleasant one to live in long ago, and doubtless has advanced, not retrograded, in that respect. A mighty work which was in progress there in my day is finished now. This is the canal over the rapids. It is 8 miles long, 300 feet wide, and is in no place less than 6 feet deep. Its masonry is of the majestic kind which the War Department usually deals in, and will endure like a Roman aqueduct. The work cost 4 or 5 millions. After an hour or 2 spent with former friends, we started up the river again. Keokuk a long time ago was an occasional loafing place of that erratic genius, Henry Clay Dean. I believe I never saw him but once, but he was much talked of when I lived there. This is what was said of him. He began life poor and without education, but he educated himself on the curbstones of Keokuk. He would sit down on a curbstone with his book, careless or unconscious of the clatter of commerce and the tramp of the passing crowds, and bury himself in his studies by the hour, never changing his position except to draw in his knees now, and then to let a dray pass unobstructed. And when his book was finished, its contents, however abstruse, had been burnt into his memory, and were his permanent possession. In this way he acquired a vast hoard of all sorts of learning, and had it pigeonholed in his head where he could put his intellectual hand on it whenever it was wanted. His clothes differed in no respect from a wharf rat's, except that they were raggeder, more ill-assorted and inharmonious, and therefore more extravagantly picturesque, and several layers dirtier. Nobody could infer the mastermind in the top of that edifice from the edifice itself. He was an orator, by nature in the first place, and later by the training of experience and practice. When he was out on a canvas, his name was a lodestone which drew the farmers to his stump from 50 miles around. His theme was always politics. He used no notes, for a volcano does not need notes. In 1862, a son of Keokuk's late distinguished citizen, Mr. Claggett, gave me this incident concerning Dean. The war feeling was running high in Keokuk, in 61, and a great mass meeting was to be held on a certain day in the new Athenaeum. A distinguished stranger was to address the house. After the building had been packed to its utmost capacity with sweltering folk of both sexes, the stage still remained vacant. The distinguished stranger had failed to connect. The crowd grew impatient and by indignant and rebellious. About this time a distressed manager discovered Dean on a curbstone, explained the dilemma to him, took his book away from him, rushed him into the building the back way, and told him to make for the stage and save his country. Presently a sudden silence fell upon the grumbling audience, and everybody's eyes sought a single point, the wide, empty, carpetless stage. A figure appeared there, whose aspect was familiar to hardly a dozen persons present. It was the scarecrow Dean in foxy shoes down at the heels, socks of odd colours also down, damaged trousers, relics of antiquity and a world too short, exposing some inches of naked ankle, an unbuttoned vest also too short, and exposing a zone of soiled and wrinkled linen between it and the waistband, shirt bosom open, long black handkerchief wound round and round the neck like a bandage, bob-tailed blue coat, reaching down to the small of the back, with sleeves which left 4 inches of forearm unprotected, small, stiff soldier cap hung on a corner of the bump of whichever bump it was. This figure moved gravely out upon the stage, and with sedate and measured step, down to the front where it paused, and dreamily inspected the house, saying no word. The silence of surprise held its own for a moment, then was broken by a just audible ripple of merriment which swept the sea of faces like the wash of a wave. The figure remained as before, thoughtfully inspecting. Another wave started, laughter this time. It was followed by another, then a third, this last one boisterous. And now the stranger stepped back 1 pace, took off his soldier cap, tossed it into the wing and began to speak with deliberation, nobody listening, everybody laughing and whispering. The speaker talked on unembarrassed and presently delivered a shot which went home, and silence and attention resulted. He followed it quick and fast with other telling things, warmed to his work and began to pour his words out instead of dripping them, grew hotter and fell to discharging lightnings and thunder. And now the house began to break into applause, to which the speaker gave no heed, but went hammering straight on, unwound his black bandage and cast it away, still thundering, presently discarded the bob-tailed coat and flung it aside, firing up high and higher all the time, finally flung the vest after the coat, and then for an untimed period stood there like another Vesuvius, spouting smoke and flame, lava and ashes, raining pumice stone and cinders, shaking the moral earth with intellectual crash upon crash, explosion upon explosion, while the mad multitude stood upon their feet in a solid body, answering back with a ceaseless hurricane of cheers, through a thrashing snowstorm of waving handkerchiefs. When Dean came, said Claggett, the people thought he was an escaped lunatic, but when he went they thought he was an escaped archangel. Burlington, home of the sparkling Burdette, is another hill city, and also a beautiful one, unquestionably so, a fine and flourishing city with a population of 25,000, and belted with busy factories of nearly every imaginable description. It was a very sober city, too, for the moment, for a most sobering bill was pending. A bill to forbid the manufacture, exportation, importation, purchase, sale, borrowing, lending, stealing, drinking, smelling or possession, by conquest, inheritance, intent, accident or otherwise, in the state of Iowa, of each and every deleterious beverage known to the human race, except water. This measure was approved by all the rational people in the state, but not by the bench of judges. Burlington has the progressive modern city's full equipment of devices for right and intelligent government, including a paid fire department, a thing which the great city of New Orleans is without, but still employs that relic of antiquity, the independent system. In Burlington, as in all these upper river towns, one breathes a go-ahead atmosphere which tastes good in the nostrils. An opera house has lately been built there, which is in strong contrast with the shabby dens, which usually do duty as theatres in cities of Burlington's size. We had not time to go ashore in Muscatine, but had a daylight view of it from the boat. I lived there a while many years ago, but the place now had a rather unfamiliar look, so I suppose it has clear outgrown the town which I used to know. In fact, I know it has, for I remember it as a small place, which it isn't now, but I remember it best for a lunatic who caught me out in the fields one Sunday, and extracted a butcher knife from his boot, and proposed to carve me up with it. Unless I acknowledged him to be the only son of the devil, I tried to compromise on an acknowledgement that he was the only member of the family I had met, but that did not satisfy him. He wouldn't have any half measures. I must say he was the sole and only son of the devil. He whetted his knife on his boot. It did not seem worthwhile to make trouble about a little thing like that, so I swung round to his view of the matter and saved my skin whole. Shortly afterward, he went to visit his father, and as he has not turned up since, I trust he is there yet. And I remember Muscatine, still more pleasantly, for its summer sunsets. I have never seen any on either side of the ocean that equaled them. They used the broad, smooth river as a canvas, and painted on it every imaginable dream of colour, from the mottled daintinesses and delicacies of the opal, all the way up, through cumulative intensities, to blinding purple and crimson conflagrations which were enchanting to the eye, but sharply tried it at the same time. All the upper Mississippi region has these extraordinary sunsets as a familiar spectacle. It is the true sunset land. I am sure no other country can show so good a right to the name. The sunrises are also said to be exceedingly fine. I do not know. Chapter 58. On the upper river. The big towns drop in, thick and fast now, and between stretch processions of thrifty farms, not desolate solitude. Hour by hour the boat ploughs deeper and deeper into the great and populous Northwest, and with each successive section of it which is revealed, one's surprise and respect gather emphasis and increase. Such a people and such achievements as theirs compel homage. This is an independent race who think for themselves, and who are competent to do it, because they are educated and enlightened. They read, they keep abreast of the best and newest thought. They fortify every weak place in their land with a school, a college, a library, and a newspaper, and they live under law. Solicitude for the future of a race like this is not in order. This region is new, so new that it may be said to be still in its babyhood. By what it has accomplished while still teething, one may forecast what marvels it will do in the strength of its maturity. It is so new that the foreign tourist has not heard of it yet, and has not visited it. For 60 years, the foreign tourist has steamed up and down the river between St. Louis and New Orleans, and then gone home and written his book, believing he had seen all of the river that was worth seeing or that had anything to see. In not 6 of all these books is there mention of these upper river towns, for the reason that the 5 or 6 tourists who penetrated this region did it before these towns were projected. The latest tourist of them all, 1878, made the same old regulation trip. He had not heard that there was anything north of St. Louis. Yet there was this amazing region, bristling with great towns, projected day before yesterday, so to speak, and built next morning. A score of them number from 1,500 to 5,000 people. Then we have Muscatine, 10,000, Winona, 10,000, Moline, 10,000, Rock Island, 12,000, La Crosse, 12,000, Burlington, 25,000, Dubuque, 25,000, Davenport, 30,000, St. Paul, 58,000, Minneapolis, 60,000 and upward. The foreign tourist has never heard of these. There is no note of them in his books. They have sprung up in the night while he slept. So new is this region that I, who am comparatively young, am yet older than it is. When I was born, St. Paul had a population of 3 persons. Minneapolis had just a third as many. The then population of Minneapolis died 2 years ago, and when he died he had seen himself undergo an increase in 40 years of 59,999 persons. He had a frog's fertility. I must explain that the figures set down above, as the population of St. Paul and Minneapolis, are several months old. These towns are far larger now. In fact, I have just seen a newspaper estimate which gives the former 71,000 and the latter 78,000. This book will not reach the public for 6 or 7 months yet. None of the figures will be worth much then. We had a glimpse of Davenport, which is another beautiful city crowning a hill, a phrase which applies to all these towns, for they are all comely, all well built, clean, orderly, pleasant to the eye and cheering to the spirit, and they are situated upon hills. Therefore we will give that phrase a rest. The Indians have a tradition that Marquette and Joliet camped where Davenport now stands, in 1673. The next white man who camped there did it about 170 years later, in 1834. Davenport has gathered its 30,000 people within the past 30 years. She sends more children to her schools now than her whole population numbered 23 years ago. She has the usual upper river quota of factories, newspapers, and institutions of learning. She has telephones, local telegraphs, an electric alarm, and an admirable paid fire department, consisting of 6 hook and ladder companies, 4 steam fire engines, and 30 churches. Davenport is the official residence of 2 bishops, Episcopal and Catholic. Opposite Davenport is the flourishing town of Rock Island, which lies at the foot of the upper rapids. A great railroad bridge connects the 2 towns, one of the 13 which fret the Mississippi and the Pilots between St. Louis and St. Paul. The charming island of Rock Island, 3 miles long and half a mile wide, belongs to the United States, and the government has turned it into a wonderful park, enhancing its natural attractions by art, and threading its fine forests with many miles of drives. Near the center of the island one catches glimpses through the trees of 10 vast stone 4-story buildings, each of which covers an acre of ground. These are the government workshops, for the Rock Island establishment is a national armory and arsenal. We move up the river, always through enchanting scenery, there being no other kind on the upper Mississippi, and pass Moline, a center of vast manufacturing industries, and Clinton and Leon, great lumber centers, and presently reach Dubuque, which is situated in a rich mineral region. The lead mines are very productive and of wide extent. Dubuque has a great number of manufacturing establishments, among them a plough factory which has for customers all Christendom in general. At least so I was told by an agent of the concern who was on the boat. He said, "You show me any country under the sun where they really know how to plough, and if I don't show you our mark on the plough they use, I'll eat that plough, and I won't ask for any Worcestershire sauce to flavour it up with either." All this part of the river is rich in Indian history and traditions. Black Hawk's was once a puissant name hereabouts, as was Keokuk's further down. A few miles below Dubuque is the Tete de Mort, Death's Head Rock or Bluff, to the top of which the French drove a band of Indians in early times, and cooped them up there, with death for a certainty, and only the manner of it matter of choice, to starve or jump off and kill themselves. Black Hawk adopted the ways of the white people, toward the end of his life, and when he died he was buried near Des Moines in Christian fashion, modified by Indian custom, that is to say, clothed in a Christian military uniform and with a Christian cane in his hand, but deposited in the grave in a sitting posture. Formerly, a horse had always been buried with a chief. The substitution of the cane shows that Black Hawk's haughty nature was really humbled, and he expected to walk when he got over. We noticed that above Dubuque the water of the Mississippi was olive green, rich and beautiful and semi-transparent, with the sun on it. Of course the water was nowhere as clear or of as fine a complexion as it is in some other seasons of the year, for now it was at flood stage, and therefore dimmed and blurred by the mud manufactured from caving banks. The majestic bluffs that overlook the river along through this region charm one with the grace and variety of their forms, and the soft beauty of their adornment. The steep verdant slope, whose base is at the water's edge, is topped by a lofty rampart of broken, turreted rocks, which are exquisitely rich and mellow in colour, mainly dark browns and dull greens, but splashed with other tints. And then you have the shining river, winding here and there and yonder, its sweep interrupted at intervals by clusters of wooded islands threaded by silver channels, and you have glimpses of distant villages asleep upon capes, and of stealthy rafts slipping along in the shade of the forest walls, and of white steamers vanishing around remote points. And it is all as tranquil and reposeful as dreamland, and has nothing this worldly about it, nothing to hang a fret or a worry upon. Until the unholy train comes tearing along, which it presently does, ripping the sacred solitude to rags and tatters with its devil's war whoop, and the roar and thunder of its rushing wheels, and straightway you are back in this world, and with one of its frets ready to hand for your entertainment. For you remember that this is the very road whose stock always goes down after you buy it, and always goes up again as soon as you sell it. It makes me shudder to this day, to remember that I once came near not getting rid of my stock at all. It must be an awful thing to have a railroad left on your hands. The locomotive is in sight from the deck of the steamboat, almost the whole way from St. Louis to St. Paul, 800 miles. These railroads have made havoc with the steamboat commerce. The clerk of our boat was a steamboat clerk before these roads were built. In that day the influx of population was so great, and the freight business so heavy, that the boats were not able to keep up with the demands made upon their carrying capacity. Consequently the captains were very independent and airy, pretty biggity, as Uncle Remus would say. The clerk nutshelled the contrast between the former time and the present thus. Boat used to land, captain on hurricane roof, mighty stiff and straight, iron ramrod for a spine, kid gloves, plug tile, hair parted behind, man on shore takes off hat and says, "Got 28 tons of wheat, cap'n be great favor if you can take them." Captain says, "I'll take 2 of them, and don't even condescend to look at him." But nowadays the captain takes off his old slouch, and smiles all the way around to the back of his ears, and gets off a bow which he hasn't got any ramrod to interfere with, and says, "Glad to see you, Smith, glad to see you, you're looking well. Haven't seen you looking so well for years, what you got for us?" "Nothin'," says Smith, and keeps his hat on and just turns his back and goes to talking with somebody else. Oh yes, 8 years ago the captain was on top, but it's Smith's turn now. 8 years ago a boat used to go up the river with every stateroom full, and people piled 5 and 6 deep on the cabin floor, and a solid deckload of immigrants and harvesters down below into the bargain. To get a first-class stateroom, you got to prove 16 quarterings of nobility and 400 years of descent, or be personally acquainted with the nigger that blacked the captain's boots. But it's all changed now. Plenty staterooms above, no harvesters below. There's a patent self-binder now, and they don't have harvesters anymore. They've gone where the woodbine twineth, and they didn't go by steamboat either, went by the train. Up in this region we met massed acres of lumber rafts coming down, but not floating leisurely along, in the old-fashioned way, manned with joyous and reckless crews of fiddling, song-singing, whiskey-drinking, breakdown-dancing rapscallions. No, the whole thing was shoved swiftly along by a powerful stern-wheeler, modern fashion, and the small crews were quiet, orderly men, of a sedate business aspect, with not a suggestion of romance about them anywhere. Along here somewhere on a black night, we ran some exceedingly narrow and intricate island chutes by aid of the electric light. Behind was solid blackness, a crackless bank of it. Ahead, a narrow elbow of water, curving between dense walls of foliage that almost touched our bows on both sides. And here every individual leaf and every individual ripple stood out in its natural color, and flooded with a glare as of noonday intensified. The effect was strange and fine and very striking. We passed Prairie du Chien, another of Father Marquette's camping places, and after some hours of progress through varied and beautiful scenery, reached La Crosse. Here is a town of 12 or 13,000 population, with electric lighted streets, and with blocks of buildings which are stately enough and also architecturally fine enough to command respect in any city. It is a choice town, and we made satisfactory use of the hour allowed us, in roaming it over, though the weather was rainier than necessary. Chapter 59. Legends and Scenery. We added several passengers to our list at La Crosse, among others an old gentleman who had come to this northwestern region with the early settlers and was familiar with every part of it. Pardonably proud of it too, he said. "You'll find scenery between here and St. Paul that can give the Hudson points. You'll have the Queen's Bluff, 700 feet high, and just as imposing a spectacle as you can find anywheres, and Trempealeau Island, which isn't like any other island in America, I believe, for it is a gigantic mountain with precipitous sides, and is full of Indian traditions, and used to be full of rattlesnakes. If you catch the sun just right there, you will have a picture that will stay with you, and above Winona you'll have lovely prairies, and then come the Thousand Islands, too beautiful for anything. Green. Why, you never saw foliage so green nor packed so thick. It's like 1,000 plush cushions afloat on a looking-glass when the water's still. And then the monstrous bluffs on both sides of the river, ragged, rugged, dark-complected, just the frame that's wanted. You always want a strong frame, you know, to throw up the nice points of a delicate picture and make them stand out. The old gentleman also told us a touching Indian legend or two, but not very powerful ones. After this excursion into history, he came back to the scenery, and described it detail by detail from the Thousand Islands to St. Paul, naming its names with such facility, tripping along his theme with such nimble and confident ease, slamming in a 3-ton word here and there, with such a complacent air of "T isn't anything, I can do it any time I want to," and letting off fine surprises of lurid eloquence at such judicious intervals, that I presently began to suspect. But no matter what I began to suspect, hear him. 10 miles above Winona, we come to Fountain City, nestling sweetly at the feet of cliffs that lift their awful fronts Jove-like, toward the blue depths of heaven, bathing them in virgin atmospheres that have known no other contact save that of angels' wings. And next we glide through silver waters, amid lovely and stupendous aspects of nature that attune our hearts to adoring admiration, about 12 miles, and strike Mount Vernon, 600 feet high, with romantic ruins of a once first-class hotel perched far among the cloud shadows that mottle its dizzy heights, sole remnant of once flourishing Mount Vernon, town of early days, now desolate and utterly deserted, 80k. And so we move on. Past Chimney Rock we fly noble shaft of 600 feet, then just before landing at Minisker our attention is attracted by a most striking promontory rising over 500 feet, the ideal mountain pyramid. Its conic shape, thickly wooded surface girding its sides, and its apex like that of a cone, cause the spectator to wonder at nature's workings. From its dizzy heights superb views of the forests, streams, bluffs, hills and dales below and beyond, for miles are brought within its focus. What grander river scenery can be conceived, as we gaze upon this enchanting landscape, from the uppermost point of these bluffs upon the valleys below? The primeval wildness and awful loneliness of these sublime creations of nature and nature's God excite feelings of unbounded admiration, and the recollection of which can never be effaced from the memory, as we view them in any direction. Next we have the lion's head and the lioness's head, carved by nature's hand, to adorn and dominate the beauteous stream. And then anon the river widens, and a most charming and magnificent view of the valley before us suddenly bursts upon our vision. Rugged hills, clad with verdant forests from summit to base, level prairie lands, holding in their lap the beautiful Wabasha, city of the healing waters, puissant foe of Bright's disease, and that grandest conception of nature's works, incomparable Lake Pepin. These constitute a picture whereon the tourist's eye may gaze uncounted hours, with rapture unappeased and unappeasable. And so we glide along, in due time encountering those majestic domes, the mighty Sugar Loaf, and the sublime Maiden's Rock, which latter romantic superstition has invested with a voice, and oft times as the birch canoe glides near at twilight, the dusky paddler fancies he hears the soft, sweet music of the long-departed Winona, darling of Indian song and story. Then Frontenac looms upon our vision, delightful resort of jaded summer tourists, then progressive Red Wing, and Diamond Bluff impressive and preponderous in its lone sublimity, then Prescott and the St. Croix, and anon we see bursting upon us the domes and steeples of St. Paul, giant young chief of the North, marching with 7-league stride in the van of progress, banner-bearer of the highest and newest civilization, carving his beneficent way with the tomahawk of commercial enterprise, sounding the war-whoop of Christian culture, tearing off the reeking scalp of sloth and superstition to plant there the steam plough and the schoolhouse. Ever in his front stretch arid lawlessness, ignorance, crime, despair. Ever in his wake bloom the jail, the gallows, and the pulpit. And ever. Have you ever travelled with a panorama? I have formerly served in that capacity. My suspicion was confirmed. Do you still travel with it? No, she is laid up till the fall season opens. I am helping now to work up the materials for a tourist's guide, which the St. Louis and St. Paul Packet Company are going to issue this summer for the benefit of travellers who go by that line. When you were talking of Maiden's Rock, you spoke of the long-departed Winona, darling of Indian song and story. Is she the Maiden of the Rock, and are the two connected by legend? Yes, and a very tragic and painful one, perhaps the most celebrated, as well as the most pathetic, of all the legends of the Mississippi. We asked him to tell it. He dropped out of his conversational vein and back into his lecture gait without an effort, and rolled on as follows. A little distance above Lake City is a famous point known as Maiden's Rock, which is not only a picturesque spot, but is full of romantic interest from the event which gave it its name. Not many years ago this locality was a favorite resort for the Sioux Indians on account of the fine fishing and hunting to be had there, and large numbers of them were always to be found in this locality. Among the families which used to resort here was one belonging to the tribe of Wabasha. Winona, firstborn, was the name of a maiden who had plighted her troth to a lover belonging to the same band, but her stern parents had promised her hand to another, a famous warrior, and insisted on her wedding him. The day was fixed by her parents to her great grief. She appeared to accede to the proposal and accompany them to the rock, for the purpose of gathering flowers for the feast. On reaching the rock, Winona ran to its summit, and standing on its edge upbraided her parents who were below, for their cruelty, and then singing a death dirge, threw herself from the precipice and dashed them in pieces on the rock below. Dashed who in pieces? Her parents? Yes. Well, it certainly was a tragic business, as you say. And moreover, there is a startling kind of dramatic surprise about it which I was not looking for. It is a distinct improvement upon the threadbare form of Indian legend. There are 50 lovers leaps along the Mississippi from whose summit disappointed Indian girls have jumped, but this is the only jump in the lot hat turned out in the right and satisfactory way. What became of Winona? She was a good deal jarred up and jolted, but she got herself together and disappeared before the coroner reached the fatal spot. And T said she sought and married her true love, and wandered with him to some distant clime, where she lived happy ever after, her gentle spirit mellowed and chastened by the romantic incident which had so early deprived her of the sweet guidance of a mother's love and a father's protecting arm, and thrown her, all unfriended, upon the cold charity of a censorious world. I was glad to hear the lecturer's description of the scenery, for it assisted my appreciation of what I saw of it, and enabled me to imagine such of it as we lost by the intrusion of night. As the lecturer remarked, this whole region is blanketed with Indian tales and traditions, but I reminded him that people usually merely mention this fact, doing it in a way to make a body's mouth water, and judiciously stopped there. Why? Because the impression left was that these tales were full of incident and imagination, a pleasant impression which would be promptly dissipated if the tales were told. I showed him a lot of this sort of literature which I had been collecting, and he confessed that it was poor stuff, exceedingly sorry rubbish, and I ventured to add that the legends which he had himself told us were of this character, with the single exception of the admirable story of Winona. He granted these facts, but said that if I would hunt up Mr. Schoolcraft's book, published near 50 years ago, and now doubtless out of print, I would find some Indian inventions in it that were very far from being barren of incident and imagination, that the tales in Hiawatha were of this sort, and they came from Schoolcraft's book, and that there were others in the same book which Mr. Longfellow could have turned into verse with good effect. For instance, there was the legend of the undying head. He could not tell it, for many of the details had grown dim in his memory, but he would recommend me to find it and enlarge my respect for the Indian imagination. He said that this tale, and most of the others in the book, were current among the Indians along this part of the Mississippi when he first came here, and that the contributors to Schoolcraft's book had got them directly from Indian lips, and had written them down with strict exactness, and without embellishments of their own. I have found the book. The lecturer was right. There are several legends in it which confirm what he said. I will offer 2 of them, the undying head, and Pebon and Sigwan, an allegory of the seasons. The latter is used in Hiawatha, but it is worth reading in the original form, if only that one may see how effective a genuine poem can be without the helps and graces of poetic measure and rhythm. Pebon and Sigwan. An old man was sitting alone in his lodge by the side of a frozen stream. It was the close of winter, and his fire was almost out. He appeared very old and very desolate. His locks were white with age, and he trembled in every joint. Day after day passed in solitude, and he heard nothing but the sound of the tempest, sweeping before it the new-fallen snow. One day, as his fire was just dying, a handsome young man approached and entered his dwelling. His cheeks were red with the blood of youth, his eyes sparkled with animation, and a smile played upon his lips. He walked with a light and quick step. His forehead was bound with a wreath of sweet grass in place of a warrior's frontlet, and he carried a bunch of flowers in his hand. "Ah, my son," said the old man, "I am happy to see you. Come in. Come and tell me of your adventures and what strange lands you have been to see. Let us pass the night together. I will tell you of my prowess and exploits and what I can perform. You shall do the same, and we will amuse ourselves." He then drew from his sack a curiously wrought antique pipe, and having filled it with tobacco, rendered mild by a mixture of certain leaves, handed it to his guest. When this ceremony was concluded, they began to speak. "I blow my breath," said the old man, "and the stream stands still. The water becomes stiff and hard as clear stone." "I breathe," said the young man, "and flowers spring up over the plain." I shake my locks, retorted the old man, and snow covers the land. The leaves fall from the trees at my command, and my breath blows them away. The birds get up from the water and fly to a distant land. The animals hide themselves from my breath, and the very ground becomes as hard as flint. I shake my ringlets, rejoined the young man, and warm showers of soft rain fall upon the earth. The plants lift up their heads out of the earth like the eyes of children glistening with delight. My voice recalls the birds. The warmth of my breath unlocks the streams. Music fills the groves wherever I walk, and all nature rejoices. At length the sun began to rise. A gentle warmth came over the place. The tongue of the old man became silent. The robin and bluebird began to sing on the top of the lodge. The stream began to murmur by the door, and the fragrance of growing herbs and flowers came softly on the vernal breeze. Daylight fully revealed to the young man the character of his entertainer. When he looked upon him, he had the icy visage of Pebon. Streams began to flow from his eyes. As the sun increased, he grew less and less in stature, and anon had melted completely away. Nothing remained on the place of his large fire but the muscodede, a small white flower with a pink border, which is one of the earliest species of northern plants. The undying head is a rather long tail, but it makes up in weird conceits, fairy tale prodigies, variety of incident, and energy of movement, for what it lacks in brevity. Chapter 60. Speculations and Conclusions. We reached St. Paul at the head of navigation of the Mississippi, and there our voyage of 2,000 miles from New Orleans ended. It is about a 10-day trip by steamer. It can probably be done quicker by rail. I judge so because I know that one may go by rail from St. Louis to Hannibal, a distance of at least 120 miles in 7 hours. This is better than walking, unless one is in a hurry. The season being far advanced when we were in New Orleans, the roses and magnolia blossoms were falling. But here in St. Paul it was the snow. In New Orleans we had caught an occasional withering breath from over a crater, apparently. Here in St. Paul we caught a frequent benumbing one from over a glacier, apparently. But I wander from my theme. St. Paul is a wonderful town. It is put together in solid blocks of honest brick and stone, and has the air of intending to stay. Its post office was established 36 years ago, and by, when the postmaster received a letter, he carried it to Washington horseback to inquire what was to be done with it. Such is the legend. 2 frame houses were built that year, and several persons were added to the population. A recent number of the leading St. Paul paper, the Pioneer Press, gives some statistics which furnish a vivid contrast to that old state of things, to wit, population, autumn of the present year, 1882, 71,000. Number of letters handled, first half of the year, 1,209,387. Number of houses built during 3/4 of the year, 989. Their cost, $3,186,000. The increase of letters over the corresponding 6 months of last year was 50%. Last year the new buildings added to the city cost above $4,500,000. St. Paul's strength lies in her commerce, I mean his commerce. He is a manufacturing city, of course, all the cities of that region are, but he is peculiarly strong in the matter of commerce. Last year his jobbing trade amounted to upwards of $52 million. He has a custom house, and is building a costly capital to replace the one recently burned, for he is the capital of the state. He has churches without end, and not the cheap poor kind, but the kind that the rich Protestant puts up, the kind that the poor Irish hired girl delights to erect. What a passion for building majestic churches the Irish hired girl has. It is a fine thing for our architecture, but too often we enjoy her stately fanes without giving her a grateful thought. In fact, instead of reflecting that, every brick and every stone in this beautiful edifice represents an ache or a pain, and a handful of sweat and hours of heavy fatigue, contributed by the back and forehead and bones of poverty. It is our habit to forget these things entirely, and merely glorify the mighty temple itself, without vouchsafing one praiseful thought to its humble builder, whose rich heart and withered purse it symbolizes. This is a land of libraries and schools. St. Paul has 3 public libraries, and they contain, in the aggregate, some 40,000 books. He has 116 schoolhouses, and pays out more than $70,000 a year in teachers' salaries. There is an unusually fine railway station. So large is it, in fact, that it seemed somewhat overdone in the matter of size at first, but at the end of a few months it was perceived that the mistake was distinctly the other way. The error is to be corrected. The town stands on high ground. It is about 700 feet above the sea level. It is so high that a wide view of river and lowland is offered from its streets. It is a very wonderful town indeed, and is not finished yet. All the streets are obstructed with building material, and this is being compacted into houses as fast as possible to make room for more, for other people are anxious to build, as soon as they can get the use of the streets to pile up their bricks and stuff in. How solemn and beautiful is the thought that the earliest pioneer of civilization, the van leader of civilization, is never the steamboat, never the railroad, never the newspaper, never the Sabbath school, never the missionary, but always whiskey. Such is the case. Look history over, you will see. The missionary comes after the whiskey. I mean, he arrives after the whiskey has arrived. Next comes the poor immigrant with axe and hoe and rifle. Next the trader, next the miscellaneous rush, next the gambler, the desperado, the highwayman and all their kindred in sin of both sexes. And next the smart chap who has bought up an old grant that covers all the land. This brings the lawyer tribe. The vigilance committee brings the undertaker. All these interests bring the newspaper. The newspaper starts up politics and a railroad. All hands turn to and build a church and a jail, and behold, civilization is established forever in the land. But whiskey, you see, was the van leader in this beneficent work. It always is. It was like a foreigner and excusable in a foreigner to be ignorant of this great truth and wander off into astronomy to borrow a symbol. But if he had been conversant with the facts, he would have said, "Westward the jug of empire takes its way." This great van leader arrived upon the ground which St. Paul now occupies in June 1837. Yes, at that date, Pierre Parent, a Canadian, built the first cabin, uncorked his jug, and began to sell whiskey to the Indians. The result is before us. All that I have said of the newness, briskness, swift progress, wealth, intelligence, fine and substantial architecture, and general slash and go, and energy of St. Paul will apply to his near neighbor, Minneapolis, with the addition that the latter is the bigger of the two cities. These extraordinary towns were 10 miles apart a few months ago, but were growing so fast that they may possibly be joined now, and getting along under a single mayor. At any rate, within 5 years from now, there will be at least such a substantial ligament of buildings stretching between them, and uniting them, that a stranger will not be able to tell where the one Siamese twin leaves off and the other begins. Combined, they will then number a population of 250,000 if they continue to grow as they are now growing. Thus, this center of population at the head of Mississippi navigation will then begin a rivalry as to numbers with that center of population at the foot of it, New Orleans.